Hello friends and artists. Today what I want to go over is the tools and techniques and strategies I used to draw this vintage clock. I think it's a Baroque clock. I looked it up on the internet and I could not find exactly where it was made or what year, but it looks like it was designed with brass, and there are a lot of similar looking clocks on sale on eBay and different places. Looks like it was either made in Germany, maybe Italy, but I know they also make those clocks again. So I don't know exactly the history of the clock, but here's the reference photo I was using, and I got this image from pixabay.com, where you can get royalty-free photos, so you don't have to worry about copyright infringement and stuff like that. I've downloaded or uploaded several photos to share with other people as well, and you can donate money to those. So what I used for paper for this one was Arches hot press watercolor paper. It's 100% pure cotton, and this is one of my favorite papers. It has a really smooth side, and the other side it has a little bit of texture, but I was just working on the smooth side. And when I first started, I was just using the Bic pens I normally do, and I started with the Bic Crystal, the medium flow tip. And I just wanted to mention, when you are signing your name, maybe you put a certain amount of pressure down. So when I start putting in initial hatches, you can kind of imagine that pressure of signing your name and then cutting it in half, and then in half even a second time, to really just kind of scratch the surface. So layers one at a time, and then moved on to some darker tones. This drawing took me about 25 to 30 hours to complete, so it's definitely a marathon. It wasn't no sprinting here. And if you find that you're doing a drawing this intense, my recommendation would be to do as much as you can in a sitting, and then just take a break, come back to it the next day with fresh eyes, fresh motivation for it, and that way you can give the drawing your best effort instead of just trudging right away at something that's maybe like, oh, I need a break. But your eyes will start to play tricks on you too. I want to mention too, to not be governed too heavily by your reference photo. There were some things that I adjusted and changed because I didn't particularly like. So you'll notice that I did a little bit different clock face than what is there, and the Roman numerals are a little different, but I wanted it to serve the drawing. So I always ask myself the question, a fellow artist told me, is, always look at it and ask yourself, what do you think the drawing needs? So that's what kind of guided decisions that I made about that. And there's a lot of scrolls and different things in this one. So what I did to be careful to get the shade correct on those scrolls is, look at where the source of light is, and that'll help, because once you see the contours and how it curls around, like this side will be shaded, and it helps, put all that together. So other pens that I used the fine tip, which I highly recommend for real surgical details, or if you want to do the outline. It's a really good place. This is a really good pen for that reason. Okay. And then I use this 1.6 millimeter pen, and this is a Bic Crystal pen, and it has a real heavy flow. So when I save this for the last part in the drawing, because I want to be sure that I want an area to be dark before I commit to it being that dark, because you can erase a little bit of ink, if it's scratched on real lightly with this, pen here. But if you start putting in ink with this, you're kind of done. It's there. And I also tried this one. This was a Bic Velocity 1.6, and for writing and things like that, I like it quite a bit, but it blotches a little bit too much for drawing, so I didn't actually use this a whole lot when I saw what it was doing. And I tried it on a separate, scratch pad. I recommend always using a scratch pad to warm your pen up, and have like, I think I have like 5 of these where I draw. When I'm drawing, I'll have 5 of them and just rotate through them and let them cool down, because the tip gets really, really hot, you know, and it causes friction, and less ink will come out. So something to think about. As you're going around and you're looking at the highlights, the shadows, everything, just take a step back and look at your drawing. I recommend using a kneaded eraser, and you don't want to put a lot of pressure down, because you can actually ruin, you know, the paper. But you can erase a small amount of ink if it was really lightly applied, and just kind of keep all your highlights and periodically do that. And by the end of the drawing, you'll have a really nice looking highlight versus contrasting shadows and stuff like that. And when you get a bigger drawing going like that, you know, maybe you already do, but definitely have something like under your palm, because you can really smear around a lot of ink from your palm that'll get there, you know. So that's an idea to try, and you'll see me do that a lot. You know, I really studied this image to figure out where to begin, how to start, and I looked at the shadows, and I after I have a good pencil sketch in place, of course, then we just start building in the layers one at a time. For the sketch, I'm using a mechanical pencil with very light pressure, and you can see I put in a kind of a large square grid to anchor in the edges and outline, and drew in the rest from there. I was real careful with the clock hands. I wanted it to be about 11:58 p.m. and you can see the name on it was quartz, and trying to be careful of the font type, the way it looks from a distance, and you know, it's got a real signature look on it, you'll see on clocks. And you can notice the pencil line seems a little shaky. My hand can be a little shaky at times, and don't panic about that at the first pass, because you're going to build in the layers, and you can blend and make little corrections here and there. The outline itself took a very long time, you know, so take a break if you need to. Come back the next day with clean eyes, fresh eyes, and always look to see if you maybe overlooked a detail or something you wanted to include in your drawing. But I'm just going around with the medium tip bit crystal, also good for outlines, and just spending time, you know, the more detail you put in now, that will kind of help you. You can see here that I've got a nice, all those scrolls around. I'm just trying to put in those details little by little, so that when I come back for a first, second pass, I know where the anchor I wanted to be for the extra dark part of the drawing. So I usually start on the left-hand side of a drawing and work my way to the right, because I'm right-handed. And this first pass, it looks real scratchy. You can see like I'm almost on top of mountain peaks, and don't worry about that, because you're going to come back more and more and build it up. You can see it's kind of getting a bit darker now there, but it's the first pass is mainly about putting tone down and a little more pressure where there's a dark area, and a little bit lighter pressure where there's a highlight, and then where it's an absolute highlight, where I want it to be reflecting, I don't actually put anything down. And I've seen a lot of artists use different approaches. I like to use hatch marks pretty much for everything. Once in a while I will use circles. Some people use circles quite often to start developing tones, and then they'll put hatch marks on top of their circular passes. So experiment, try a lot of things, see what works for you. But where there's going to be darker values, you know, even there in the leaves, I'm just starting to build in with a little bit more pressure. Take a step back and look at it, move forward, and the scrolls, there's lots of little, I don't even know how to properly describe them, but the detail there at the bottom where there's like some leaves, and the scrolls where they meet that base, there's really some neat shadows that you can get underneath them. And the scrolls, you can help sell the idea that it's not a two-dimensional thing, but a three-dimensional thing by putting the shade in the right spot and the highlight in the right spot. Also, I outline a lot of those details at the base of the clock by putting an outline and then a real light shade in between the outline where I had those initial lines. So then it's like I have some clean boundaries to go around. And later on, I know I'm going to go in and I'm going to put in some heavier pressure to sell the idea where the light's coming from. And continuing on, start adding a little bit more detail of the leaves. This is it's a piece of brass that I'm trying to recreate with a pen, so I know there's a lot of texture in the brass, and this is an old clock, so it has some use and some weather. And so I'm not going to recreate the whole effect, but I'm going to aim at it, and I'm going to work hard to get as much as I can until I get something that I like, feel proud of. And the bit around the edge there, all of the clock face around the clock face has that scroll kind of pattern that it expands and then meets at a point and expands and meets at a point. I was going everywhere but the scroll. I was kind of saving those as highlight values, and then from there we'll come back and we'll put in some more values, and then even where the highlights are, there's at the end of the drawing there'll be some pen hatches, and where I know there's going to be a dark value, as long as you know it's going to be there, you can put a little more pressure to put that in and not worry that, oh man, I just ruined my drawing. But if you're not sure, just don't do it. Come back to it later when you are sure. Even in the initial stages, just looking at it, you want to make sure that you're selling the idea of where the light's coming from. For me, I know the light's coming from the upper left, so as I put the lightest values and the darker values, I know that I'm expecting it to be a highlight on the left, even if it isn't that way in the reference photo, because you can't be too much of a slave to the reference photo. You've got to sort of sell what you're drawing, the story you're telling, and if the light's coming from the left and it makes sense for the drawing that it's that way, then that's what you do. Come back to it the next day and see if you need to make changes. And you'll notice the clock face, it has a real interesting rim around it, and it actually casts the shadow on the right hand side. So on the inside of the face there's a real good spot to put a nice dark value, and on the outside of the right hand side of the face there's that same dark value. So when you have several dark values, you don't want to just put all your pressure in and the same amount everywhere. You want to graduate and build up to those highlight values, and I think the term is burnish the paper, but that's where you're putting down all the pressure you can, and you're really almost not damaging the paper, but where there were mountaintops and valleys, the tooth of the paper, there won't be that anymore because you've got so much pressure into it. I would reserve that for the moments when you know it's going to be dark and later on in the drawing. And one of the tricky things here is, you can see even there on the bottom right, the foot area of the base, you're drawing and you're putting a shade, and it's a negative drawing thing. You're not drawing the thing, you're drawing the shade of the thing. So there's a whole spot there that's a highlight, so I'm putting the shade where it belongs, but as you do that all around it, you sort of see the shape come to life. And it takes a little patience and practice, and I'm improving at it myself. But when you get in there, put the pressure in where you know it needs to go, and maybe take a step back and look at it and see if it's telling the story that you wanted. Here I went in with a fine tip pen. You can notice the change little by little as you go around and anchor in the outline edges, the values where it's going to be nice and dark. And here are the scrolls, even just where the highlights and the shadows are going to be. It's a nice pen for that. And I guess you could say after you have all those boundaries in, you can go in and put in the darker ones. You can get some nice dark values out of that pen too if you're real patient in an area with several hatches. But this was a little bit different than the reference photo, and I just wanted it to be a little more uniform than the actual clock was. I imagine those brass makers were very talented what they did, and even at the best there's still some places in the clock where it's not quite perfect, or but I've tried to make it as close as I could to be symmetrical and repeating a repeating pattern. And there, the outline of the clock, you can put in that fine tip pen around the outline. And you do need some pen spinning brakes, or I do. It helps me to think for some reason. But yeah, you go the Roman numerals I put in with a fine tip pen, and then start to build in a little more pressure. And I remember studying Roman numerals when I was a kid, and I thought 4 was IV, but maybe it was 4 I's. I thought it goes 1, 2, 3 with the letter I, and then 4 was an IV, not 4 bars. But that's what the reference clock is, reference photo is, and actually we have one in our house that we bought in the past decade, and it has 4 ones. So I guess that's my homework. I need to go back and review that. Maybe I will if I forget. But anyways, now that you can see I'm trying that one pen that I told you about, the Velocity. It actually kind of put in a little too much ink here and there, and it blotched, and I almost ruined one of those left scrolls. So I decided, you know what, I'm just going to stick with what I know. It's nice to try a new pen. You want to try the new pens when you have kind of a practice thing, and I wanted this to be as nice as I could possibly make it. So I went back to the Bit Crystal 1.6 millimeter tip, and again you can see there, even with the thick pen, I'm not burnishing the paper, pushing all my pressure in, just kind of building it little by little, layering it in until, as you look at it, the top to the bottom, left to right, the whole drawing as a whole, are you seeing a nice value scale? Are you looking at it and noticing the highlights? Are you noticing where you maybe should put in a little more pressure? Are the same values in the wrong spots? And so on and so on. And with a drawing like this with ink, you don't have a whole lot you can do if you put too much ink down, unless you want to reach for some white gouache or some acrylic paint or something, I guess. But if you want to be a purist ink artist, you got to be real careful and then subtly approach it. Other artists I know would start in one area, and then as they go left to right, like it's a completed drawing all the way through. I haven't ever been able to do that, or want necessarily to do that, but I know that some people, they do that. And so if that's something you'd prefer, instead of going back layer at a time all over the whole thing, try it.